Educational Leadership Program. Her areas of focus include volunteer leadership and development, 4-H club development, community development, after-school programming, school enrichment, diversity, inclusion, and positive youth development research around community engagement, workforce readiness, teen leadership, and social capital. Ms. Fields will be presenting today's topic on increasing social capital through youth development. So without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce today our presenter, Ms. Nia Amani Fields.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you all for joining this afternoon. So today, like Mark mentioned, we will be discussing increasing social capital through culturally relevant positive youth development programs. Feel free to share questions throughout the chat or throughout the presentation, and we certainly can have some time for questions at the end as well. So just an overview of today's presentation. Going to introduce the concepts of social injustice, just briefly. We're not going to get into too much depth in that area, but are going to introduce the topic, as well as culturally relevant pedagogy and what that means and what that means for positive youth development. Going to explore the community capitals framework and pay special attention to social capital, and then look at the intersections between these concepts, social capital, social justice, and culturally relevant positive youth development. And then we're going to conclude with some resources that might be relevant for your work, including ripple effect mapping, a survey interview tool for research, and then some scholarly pieces around these areas. So first I wanted to start with the concept of social injustice. And I hear some feedback. I'm not sure if folks are muted, but just a reminder to do that. But looking at social injustice and inequity as a concept and what that means for youth development. So this is a good visual that explains the difference between equality and equity. We often, in our work in education and in out-of-school time programming, consider equality to be the thing to strive towards, but this picture here shows some of the differences between the two. Where in equality, everyone gets the same resources with the expectation that the outcomes would be the same. This differs from equity, where there are some different resources that are needed for different groups and for different communities so that you can have similar outcomes. And a lot of this comes from some of the historical injustices that exist in certain communities for people of color, for people that are living in poverty, and some other kind of areas within our country and throughout the world, really. But this visual is just a good opportunity for us to just take a second to think about some of the differences that are needed within our work versus when you're exploring the differences between equality and equity. And as we deliver out-of-school time programs, considering what some of those differences might be within programs. So if you look at some of the inequities within education, there are a lot of research that says positive youth development and out-of-school time programs can kind of combat some of the injustices and inequities within education. So just wanted to look at some of the historical aspects of some of these inequalities. So there is a common misconception that equal education exists within our country, when this in fact is not the case. There are inadequate resources, some including unprepared teachers, lower expectations of minority students. There's an overrepresentation of children of color in special education. They're also disproportionately expelled from schools. And then there's an absence of culturally relevant pedagogy within schools. And this also holds true in positive youth development programs. So this is just kind of a backdrop to some of the inequities that exist within public education in our country. So you may have heard the term achievement gap, which is often used within the education system, which argues that there is a gap between races or between economic status in communities because of the achievement levels in testing, SAT scores, and other levels of achievement within education. However, there are some researchers and authors such as Gloria Latson-Billings who argues there's not as much as an achievement gap as there is an education debt that is owed to communities within this country that have been historically marginalized or have been engaged in an inequitable education system. So when you think of a debt that is owed, you think of what can be done to pay back this debt. One of the things that we can consider is positive youth development programs. But it's important to take a step to just make sure that our programs are perpetuating similar things that are done within the school system. For example, having a curriculum that is used across the board without consideration for the culturally relevant, the relevant nature of the pieces that we're using and the practices that we're using within our program. So just something else to keep in mind when we look at how we're developing our programs and delivering our programs to communities that have diverse audiences. So a little bit more about what culturally relevant pedagogy is. Like I mentioned earlier, it was coined by Gloria Latson-Billings, who is an educator out of Wisconsin. And the pedagogy rests on 3 criteria. It argues that students must experience academic success. Now, while we often think about this in the formal education sense, we can also think about how out-of-school time programs are contributing to academic success. So, with our STEM programs, with our life skills, with our programs that are developing public speaking and all of these types of things in 4-H and out-of-school time programs, how are we developing programs that can lead to academic success? And then students must develop and or maintain cultural competence. So understanding cultures, understanding how culture is involved in the education experience is an important thing for educators to understand. And then students must develop a critical consciousness through which they can challenge the status quo of the social order. So as it relates to 4-H, we can think about this with the generosity piece when we are looking at ways to give back to communities and address issues that might exist in our communities. How can we be more intentional about providing skills and opportunities to young people where they can identify a need or an issue within their community and then have the skills and tools and resources to address some of those issues that they deemed important in their communities. And, something that we all need to keep in mind as educators are, is our program culturally relevant? Are we addressing the needs of the youth in the communities that we're serving? Do we understand those cultures? Do we know what the cultures are and what some of the inequities are that exist within the communities that we're serving? That's always a good starting point to make sure that we as educators know what those needs are before we can certainly address them within communities and provide resources for the young people that we're serving. So I want to take a closer look into the Community Capitals Framework. The Community Capitals Framework is another method that is used to identify resources that are needed in a community and within a family to make sure that it is a sustainable and successful community. So these are the 7 community capitals, and you may be familiar with some of these. But financial capital, of course, that deals with the monetary resources that exist within a given community and the economic success or economic viability of a community. You have your political capital, so your elected officials, your government bodies. Social capital, which we'll spend a little bit more time on today, deals with the community network, connections, and relationships within any given community, neighborhood, and family. You have your human capital. Those are the people within a community and the skills that they have. Cultural capital, so the traditions, the norms within a community. And then you have your natural capital, the green space, the land, the waters, the rivers, the parks, and that type of thing. And then finally, your built capital. So that's the infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the buildings within a community. So the authors of this piece, of this framework, argue that you need all 7 of these things to have a vibrant community, to have strong families, and to have successful youth. So my research has focused more on social capital, and I want to talk a little bit more about what that is and how 4-H can and how out-of-school time programs can help contribute to social capital. So 3 definitions here to offer for social capital. The gist of it is that it refers to connections among individuals and communities, the networks that exist between these communities or within the community, with the idea that the stronger the network and the tighter the connection, the more likely that change can happen and that value would happen and would exist within this group. and that there would be efficacy, that the idea that one can make a difference in their community, and that one would have opportunity to both achieve success and to make difference within their community. So this is a model that University of Minnesota put together to kind of describe social capital in visual terms. So if you look at the outskirts of the model, you see 3 different types of networks, and these are the networks that exist within this social capital model. So you have your bonding networks, and with bonding you can think of more close ties, your family, your neighbors, those that are close to you. And we'll talk a little bit more about what each of these networks mean shortly. Then you have your bridging networks. Those are the looser ties, but the types of connections that can help you get ahead. Think of an employer, a mentor, or an educator in a youth development program. Folks that can help you with references for colleges and for employment and that type of thing. And then you have your linking networks. These are the systems and organizations that can help bring about change. So think larger, university, political bodies, a large institution within a community, and the folks that exist within those institutions that can help bring about some more system-wide change. And then within these different networks, you have different levels of trust and engagement that all lead to efficacy, and that's the belief that one can make a difference in their community. So the thought here is that the stronger the network, the larger the network, related to both bonding, bridging, and network, the more likely it is that you can bring about change in a community. And we'll talk more about why that is shortly. So again, there's different types of social capital. The 2 here, bonding and bridging. The bonding, again, helps you build trust. It can be a mechanism of exclusion when you think of like a country club type of mentality where it's a closed network where folks can't penetrate. In that case, it can be a mechanism of exclusion. But there are ways to make sure that we are being more inclusive in our programs. We can even think of 4-H as an exclusive program of sorts, you know, if we are targeting the same type of audiences, or if we're not being relevant to new audiences, there could be opportunities there to be exclusive as well. So we want to be mindful of that. And then with bridging social capital, we're looking at ways to link to other networks and to increase access to resources. So another visual of bonding. If you look at each of those 3 larger circles and think of that as different families or different neighborhoods, and how you have kind of tighter, smaller circles within those circles, that's the bonding social capital network. This helps you get by. So think of someone that's giving you the resources that you need to make it day by day. The sociological superglue within a community or within a family. It's good for emotional well-being. It's good to get by day to day, but not necessarily get ahead. That's where you get to the bridging network, and it looks a little scary, but these are more open and flexible networks. So they're more permeable, they have open boundaries, and this is what helps you get ahead. So if you think of a mentor to a young person that gives them additional resources that may be needed to achieve in school, or a recommendation for a job, or a reference to an academic institution, or an opportunity for a scholarship to get into a college. Those are examples of bridging social capital, because you're not just getting by, but now you have opportunities to get ahead. And we describe this as the sociological WD-40, moving you ahead, providing opportunities for professional advancement. And then finally, the linking social capital, that's kind of the turbocharged version of bridging social capital. So this is more of a vertical form of social capital, getting ahead and making change as opposed to just horizontally getting by. So this concerns issues of power, political influence, financial resources at the individual, community, and higher level. So if you think of opportunities within out-of-school time programs where they present to a political body, and the youth put together some kind of campaign to change the concept or the access to food or parks in their community, and then that causes some legislative changes in their community. That's an idea of linking capital, where because of the program that they were engaged in, they had the opportunity to speak to a group that had actual power to make institutional or political change within a community. So thinking about ways that our programs can develop all three of these types of capital are essential. So again, there are bright sides of social capital. Like I mentioned, it's the glue that keeps and builds the community together. And then it also has an opportunity to build assets and to increase opportunities and networks to resources. However, the negative side of social capital are the ones that increase or reinforce structures of privilege and inequality. And I gave the example of the country club where folks that are not inside that socioeconomic group might not have access to that opportunity. Or some universities that aren't open to certain socioeconomic backgrounds, or the cost prevents people from attending. So thinking of these types of things and then reflecting on our own programs to make sure that we are building the positive and the bright sides of social capital, and we are not reinforcing some of the negative sides of social capital where we can be more exclusive to or be increasing or perpetuating ideas of exclusiveness where folks are not invited into our programs or not feeling welcomed in our programs. So what does community and youth development have to do with social capital? Successful youth programs involve a holistic approach, right? So we're not just looking at the young person in isolation, but we're looking at them in the context of family and in the wider context of community. So having a successful child also depends on having a healthy family and having a healthy community, which is why it's important to look at the community capital framework and how it all relates to youth development. Research on successful community change and sustainable community change often identifies youth engagement as a critical piece in that progress. So again, making sure that we're looking at youth and how they relate to the community context, and if we're trying to implement change, we have to keep the young person in mind as they play a vital role in sustainability of our programs and of our community change. So we have a piece here that shows some of the linkages between the essential elements of positive youth development that we use within 4-H and the ideas of the community capital framework, particularly here highlighting social capital. So those that are familiar with our essential elements, the positive relationship with the caring adult links directly to social capital. That's the networks that we talked about with both bonding, bridging, and linking in our case. Many of us are connected to a university system. Those university systems are some of those institutions that I referenced with the linking social capital. Some of the organizations that can make more systematic and systemic change within communities. So being that positive relationship connects directly to social capital. Also, having safe emotional and physical environments connects to social capital, that connects to human capital, and then built capital as well when we're providing a physical space for young people to gather in out-of-school time. And then having an inclusive environment, again, being open. So we're looking at positive forms of social capital when we are opening our programs to people of all backgrounds, and then political capital as well. And then looking at engagement and learning, that's building life skills, leading to academic success in many cases, so that connects directly to human capital. Same with the opportunity for mastery, with developing skills in young people to help them succeed. The opportunity to see oneself as an active participant in the future, if you think back to the graphic for social capital and the efficacy in the center, that directly relates to one's ability to see themselves as a change agent, one who's able to make change in their community. And once you believe that you can make that difference, that's a powerful step in progress in one's community. And then also the opportunity for self-determination and the opportunity to value and practice service to others, direct to the community capitals framework as well. You may have also heard of the 6 C's, once the 5 C's that Pittman offered, and then the 6th C offered by Lerner, but competence, character, connections, confidence, and caring, compassion all relate to different aspects of that community capitals framework. Particularly as we look at social capital, the connections and the confidence really relate to the networks within communities, and then confidence relating back to that efficacy. And then with contribution to self, family, community, and civil society, that also relates back to those connections and then that efficacy, making that difference and that contribution to a community. So, as we develop and implement our youth development programs, it's always good to reflect back onto the framework that really guides our work, whether it's the essential elements or the 6 C's here that are offered here, and look at how our programs are intentionally targeting these areas of community capital so that we are increasing these opportunities for young people to build social capital, to increase social capital, and then develop their own human capital and as well as the other capitals that were discussed. But be more intentional about these outcomes as we deliver programs. So speaking of that, I wanted to stop here for a second just to pose a question to those that are interested in sharing. And you can share directly in the chat. Just make sure that you send it to everyone so that we can all see the responses. But just thinking about what we discussed thus far about social capital and what that means, just think about how your program contributes to social capital or how it can contribute to social capital. And while you're thinking there, sometimes when I'm talking to folks, they may say, I don't have a social capital youth program, so that's not my focus. And not taking the time to consider how their existing program might already be developing social capital. So while it might not be a social capital after-school program per se, just having the connection to an individual outside of their community or having connection to your university system is, in fact, a form of social capital. So just take a second to think about how your program currently contributes or can contribute to social capital. Just make sure you're sharing with all. Don't be shy.
Are you entering something?
I heard someone talking. Did you want to share any thoughts related to how your program contributes to social capital? All right, well, hearing none. Oh, I see one, okay. Youth mentoring youth, great. Yeah, so mentoring was one of the examples that I shared as far as bridging capital, because those mentors can serve as a person that can help the young person get ahead. The experience of mentoring also is a way to build social capital as you are making connections with other young people within your community as well, and identifying what shared resources you might have or what change you all think needs to happen within your community. So that's a great example. Let's see. Eileen says, we seek out exemplary programs and bring them to the rest of the country as a part of the university system. Great. So we are offering opportunities to audiences that might not have a connection to the university and bringing them high-quality programs. If you even think of the concept of extension, that within itself is a form of social capital because we are the research arm between the university and communities, right? So we are that connection, that network between research-based information, access to resources, whether it's faculty, whether it's grant dollars, whether it's curricula, and bringing that to communities, disseminating that information to communities. So that within itself is a form of social capital. So thank you all for sharing. Okay, so I wanted to share some of the resources that we've used in our work. The first is an interactive evaluative tool used to document program impact relative to the community capitals. So we also call it ripple mapping, and I'll show you a graphic of what that looks like. So it looks a little scary, but is organized chaos, where in the center of the map, you have a program that you want to evaluate, and you're evaluating the impact of the program. So in this example, it's the 4-H Kids Park. And you would put on the outskirts of the poster board that you would be using the 7 community capitals. So your built, financial, political, social, human, cultural, and natural. And then you would be asking 3 different questions, which we'll explore on the next slide. And then each of those 3 questions would serve as a different ripple on the map. If you think of throwing a pebble in a pond and the ripple effect that it has, that's the concept here. So that red inner circle is the first ripple and the first question. The second blue ripple is the second question. And then the third gray color is the third question that looks at the larger aspect of the capital. And then you would highlight the strongest impact, which you see there with the triangle. So the concept here, it can be used in different ways. Some people use it as a way to identify how a community was successful or how it could have improved and how it addressed the larger systems of the capitals after the program was conducted. Another way that it's used is to see how a relatively small program or service project can have a larger ripple effect within the community. So let's explore what those 3 questions are. The first one is, what are people doing differently and how are things different? So that's on the individual level. So the example that was previously shared was the park. So their example here is more people are using the park, or you've developed relationships with the garden club. So that's some of the individual changes that are happening because the park was built by 4-H members or clubs. The second question, who is benefiting and how? So how is the fact that people are doing things differently affecting others? So going back to our example here, some examples are locals and visitors have kids, or local and visitor kids have places to play, or youth learns how to participate in a public meeting, and then there's more support and knowledge for intergenerational connections. So these are some examples of how people are doing things differently because the park was built. And then the last question is the larger look here, or the higher look here, are what changes are you seeing in the community systems and institutions and organizations? So are everyday ways of thinking and doing changing, and how? So you went from individual with the first ripple to larger systems with the last ripple. And some examples here, tourists spend more time and money in the community, so you're adding to the economic sustainability of a community now. Property values might increase, for example, which means more money going back to the school systems, which all relate back to an example of inequitable education, for example, where you have lower resources in some schools that are more economically disadvantaged. Another example, city provides a maintenance line for improved facilities, so that now there's systematic change and in sustainability for maintaining this park and other parks around the neighborhood. So this is just an example of how you can start small and then look at individual change, look at community change, and then look at system change. So we also have some tools to bring this visual map to a report form so that it's more user-friendly for grant reports, or when you are advocating for political bodies and you need chart form of what some of these things are. So this is just one tool that you can use to measure and to visually depict how our programs can affect community capitals in our outcomes. Another tool that we've used and developed is a survey that measures 4-H contribution to social capital. So we are currently in our pilot stages now, where we are passing our pilot stage, where we've used it in California and in Maryland, and we are now planning to roll it out nationally to states that are interested and counties and cities that are interested in measuring social capital in their community based on engagement. And we're doing this through 9 different subscales, which relate back to that graphic that I showed earlier. So the bonding engagement, bonding network, bonding trust, and then looking at areas of bridging trust, engagement, and then linking those systematic changes, trust and engagement. And then looking at agency, also known as efficacy, so looking at how youth believe they can make a difference because of their 4-H engagement. And then what are some of the barriers that young people might be experiencing? So this is another opportunity for people that are looking to increase some of their research and data findings on how their program can develop or connect to social capital. this is an opportunity that folks can reach out to me if they're interested in learning more. We are just now at the stage of rolling it out and actually have a webinar scheduled next week, I believe on the 24th, May 24th, to go over some of these tools and how it can be implemented in a state or in a county or city. And then have some publications here that I encourage you to take a look at to learn more about some of these tools that I've shared with you today. So there are some videos and fact sheets around the ripple mapping, and I will be sharing one with you all as well to kind of walk you through step by step. The video shows you step by step how to conduct this in a youth setting. And then there was also there's some journal articles as well that are listed here talking about the contributions of social capital and 4-H and using the ripple mapping tool. And then there's also a journal called New Directions, which goes into deeper detail about this concept of social capital and the connection between 4-H and social capital. And there's a particular section in the end that focuses on vulnerable populations and what we need to consider when offering these programs to audiences that are more vulnerable. Okay, so another question, and hope we have some participation here, but how can this connect to your CYFAR project? So thinking specifically about either the concept of social capital, culturally relevant pedagogy, or the resources that I shared, whether it's the ripple mapping or the survey tool, how can you see that connecting to your CYFAR project? And you can type that right in the chat and just make sure you send it to everyone. And while we are waiting for folks to type in, I can also open it up for questions thus far. If you have any questions about any of the concepts that we shared, feel free to share that now as well. It would be great to have at least one person share how they can connect some of these resources and concepts to their CYFAR project. The downside to the webinar is that I can't look at someone in the eye and point on them. All right, so we have a comment here. So grassroots leaders, enhancing community and economic development, youth and adult partnerships, and youth as change agents. Great examples. And a lot of the work that's being done on our research team, Steve Hennis as an example, and Matt Calvert, another example of educators who are doing a lot of work in youth and adult partnerships and community development programming. So yes, these certainly relate directly back to those community capitals. And just keeping in mind when we're developing these programs that we are looking at the direct needs of the communities by them sharing what their needs are and what the cultures, what are the cultures that exist within that given community to make sure that the tools that we're bringing to them and that the resources that we're bringing to them are relevant for their needs and for their audience and for the audience, and that they also have an understanding of some of the historical barriers that might have existed within their community. You know, they might not always have that background, so letting them know, first of all, educating ourselves as educators is important so that we know what some of the inequities are that exist, and then finding ways to educate those in the community about what some of those inequities have been over time is important as well. So another comment here. They don't have a CYFAR project, but youth can realize their potential and build trust with adults and engage youth and expand their base. Another great example. and being intentional about building those networks up for young people so that they have access to opportunities, that they have connections to the university system and to other organizations within their community is an important part of our work as well. Anyone else want to share or have a question about any of the concepts that we today? We have a quiet month, so we kind of moved quicker than anticipated, but certainly you want to open it up for any questions that you all might have. And Mark, I don't know if you have any questions that you wanted to bring forth. Okay, so this is hard to measure. It's nice to have a method. Yes, a lot of our work in positive youth development is hard to measure. One obvious reason is that a lot of our outcomes, some of our outcomes don't show forth until they are adults, right? So we don't really have the same opportunities to see the change that's happening immediately, and this is one way to do that. The ripple mapping particularly looks at some of the immediate changes, but it also kind of is a forecast for what's to come because of the changes that happen within an individual or within a community, and how some of that can transpire on a more systemic institutional level. And then another comment, the evaluative tool would be helpful to show. Great, yes. So after this webinar, Mark will be sharing out or posting, I guess, on the website, the ripple mapping resources that I shared, and on the fact sheet, I do have links to the videos that are on the website now on how to conduct that ripple mapping. And then the journal article talks more about how to turn that graphic into a report form. Yeah, it looks like I've lost visual here. Okay, so give me 1 second. Okay.
So Nia, if there's something that I can help you with, let me know.
Yes, so I just came back and just looking to see if you can just let me know if there were any other questions in the chat, because that's starting over now. So.
No, I think you have covered all of them. The last chat question was regarding to social justice and relating to building social justice.
Great. So the fact sheet that will be shared with you all talks a little bit more deeply about the concept of social justice and how our programs can be more intentional about combating social injustices within a given community. Things that we kind of touched on today, which we can certainly go into more detail after today's webinar, is making sure that we are not perpetuating some of those injustices by excluding audiences from programs and having an absence of culturally relevant curricula. One thing that I like to remind folks is that often people think that being colorblind or culture blind is kind of the pinnacle of diversity and inclusion, when really that's a step on the continuum towards being inclusive to all cultures and diversity. So rather than taking the one-size-fits-all approach with our curricula and with our programs, we want to make sure that we are taking into account the cultures that exist within a community, taking into account what resources exist or may not exist, and what some of the history is related back to that, some of the inequities within the community or the dynamics within a community, and how our programs can be more intentional about addressing those specific needs, using the resources that already exist within a community and building upon those. And just making sure that our programs reflect the communities that we are reaching, and that our faculty and staff and mentors and volunteers also reflect the communities that we are aiming to serve as well. So with that, I want to thank you for your participation. I'm certainly open and available for additional questions should you think of some after today's webinar. We will be sharing an additional fact sheet that has some of the resources that I mentioned today. with some direct links to some of those resources as well. And if you're interested in learning more about the ripple mapping or the survey tool or any of the articles that I referenced, feel free to reach out to me and I can share some additional resources with you. And thank you for participating today.
Thank you very much, too, Nia, for your presentation. And I'd like to also extend my thanks for everyone who attended the webinar and remind them that the webinar was recorded. The recording will be posted on the CYFAR website in the next few days, along with any resources that Nia sends to us. This concludes this edition of the CYFAR webinar on increasing social capital through youth development. This will be our last CYFAR webinar until after the summer break. We'll send more information about our plans for webinars to the CYFAR listserv and welcome your suggestions at cyfarpdta@umn.edu. We hope to see many of you next week at the CYFAR PDTA workshop, and thank you again for attending.